Hello, welcome back to the channel. This is another one of my series of battlefields in miniature, war in miniature. And this is looking at the war in the South during the Revolutionary War 1780. This is part of a trilogy of videos. We're going to start off looking at Camden. And we're going to see where the battle takes us from there in two more battles. Now this battle has been immortalised, some would say infamously, in Mel Gibson's Patriot movie, and it's the first battle you see. And that battle actually didn't reflect entirely what you see on the screen. For starters, there wasn't a big mansion that people could sit in and watch this beautifully choreographed battle unveiled before themselves. But anyway, what takes us to the war in the South? In the north, Clinton was able to head south with 17,000 men and will capture Charleston, see his friend Lincoln, and the Southern Army. This is quite a disastrous position for the South. In June, Clinton returns to New York, leaving the capable Cornwallis, who's newly returned from England, in control. Meanwhile, the Continental Army of the South is needing to be rebuilt. Who do you get to rebuild your army? Why, General Gates, the hero of Saratoga. Gates will rebuild the army and with about 4,000 men will descend on the supply depot of Camden, which brings us to our battle today. Camden would see Gates, the campaign leading up to it, push his army at quite a pace. It wasn't ready for this. It hadn't had supplies, hadn't really worked together, and it hadn't undertaken the necessary preparations. They would arrive at Camden, or in the vicinity of, fatigued and underfed. However, Gates was pushing to capture a major British supply depot, which he believed was held by around 700 men. So you can imagine 4,000 men turning up, should be able to remove 700 men with ease. And I suppose his plan was to regroup, resupply with the strategic initiative. That's the only thing I can think of for Gates's plan. However, it was not an open battle he sought, but to advance to the vicinity of the supply depot, dig fortifications, and have the British evacuate. Probably following the rules of war. Now, for me, that was a curiously passive end to such a bold thrust. Camden was under the control of Rawdon with 1,000 men, and Cornwallis, on hearing Camden was a target, advanced quickly with another 1,200 men. The armies would stumble into each other almost at night, settle down and prepare for battle the next day, which was the 16th of August. Deployment. Gates was a former British officer and would face Cornwallis in an open battle in the British style. The terrain was relatively open, sandwiched between two swamps, like I say, with a road that would have run up the middle of the battlefield. Gates would deploy his best troops, which was the Continental troops, on his right flank. These were Continentals from Maryland and Delaware. His Carolina and Virginia militia would be deployed to his left. There would be artillery along the line of the front lines of the battle. Same with the British. I've not represented that on this battlefield since they did not have too much effect on the battle. Essentially, he would be commanding 5 brigades of troops. Cornwallis, being British, would also deploy his best troops to his right. And in this case, it would be Webster's command, which will be the 23rd and 33rd of foot with a light infantry composite. To his left was Rawdon's command, assorted loyalist infantry and militia. Finally, in the reserves, with his staff firmly on the horizon, was Tarleton with his cavalry and 2 battalions of Highlanders, 71st Highlanders, I believe. There was a slight rise where the Continental position was on the right, which I've not represented on this battlefield. To give a slight advantage, but not a massive advantage to the Continentals. Gates had the numbers, Cornwallis had the quality. Let's see how the battle begins. Phase 1. We start off on the right. So Gates has 2,000 militia, and he orders his right wing to attack at bayonet point. So the militia starts to advance. At the same time, Cornwallis orders Webster to advance, which Webster duly did. Now Webster's troops advanced to volley range. The militia must be wondering what's going on at this point. You know, they have vastly outnumbering, about 2.5 to 1. And the British have advanced to volley range and they unleash a volley. And the volley, followed by a huzzah, and the British starting to advance with bayonets, threw the whole militia into such a panic they generally threw down their loaded arms and fled in the utmost consternation. So if I read a couple of quotes. So Arthur Williams wrote to Jefferson, "Picture it as bad as you possibly can, and it will not be as bad as it really was." Garrett Watts, a militia member in the battle, "There was no effort to rally, no encouragement to fight. Officers and men joined the flight. I threw my gun away and fled." For the cost of 3 wounded militia, over 2,000 men, the entire left of Gates's command had gone. So we can remove these pieces off the field. Phase 1. Resounding success for the British so far. We move into phase 2. So Rawdon's command was given orders to advance against the Continentals as well. And they advanced and started to give fire with the Continentals. Now the Rawdon's command was repulsed. British troops were not really used to fighting the Continentals in this way. Probably expected the Continentals to flee as well. So their advance was repulsed and held. Troops would start to waver, and Cornwallis would actually charge up, getting amongst the thick of it, and famously rallied his Irish Legion at this point. Now the Continental Line Infantry would start to win the fight, and Cornwallis is there holding the line together. Phase 2 is swinging to the Continentals. However, all is not going well for the Continentals. As we know, the left flank had fled, and actually it'd be worth pointing out at this point that General Gates had fled as well. So as General Gates has fled, the British Webster's command, under British discipline, hadn't chased off after the militia, but had swung round into the flank of the Continental position. Now de Kalb had taken command of the Continentals at this point and swung his reserve to face them off. Face off against the British. So whilst it is a dire position for the Americans, they're still maintaining a position on this flank and hammering Rawdon's command. If they can hold this flank, perhaps they can pull something from this battle. Phase 3 of the battle. So whilst the Continentals are sorely pressed but holding, it was now that Cornwallis unleashes his reserves, Tarleton's cavalry and Highlanders. And as we can see, there is a gap between what the Continentals have in the flanks and the front line fighting here. His cavalry is able to exploit the gap, followed by the Highlanders getting in amongst it. Cornwallis's cavalry able to spin round behind the main battle lines meant it was all over for the Continentals. Now Gates, as I said earlier, wouldn't see his command collapse. He'd already fled and ended up about 60 miles away from the battlefield. And this became a stunning victory for Cornwallis. His army had performed as expected, and the Continental army had acted how he had expected. Tarleton's star continued to rise. A handful of Continental troops had managed to pull themselves out, about 100 or so, 200, by fleeing into those swamps on the flank. Some of these troops would join the route back. There are tales of Tarleton's troops being so tired that they couldn't wield their swords anymore as they hacked through the survivors fleeing from the battlefield. I always talk about this. Actually, if two armies were to engage each other and disengage at the same time, there wouldn't be that many casualties left on the battlefield. However, it's when one side flees and an effective pursuit is mounted that casualties start to mount. For the Continentals, it was a disaster. Gates had poorly commanded his army. His strategy and tactics oscillated wildly from aggressive bold thrusts, passiveness, again aggressive bold thrusts with his militia. He didn't consider the strengths of his army, didn't consider the strengths of the British army. He met the British army in a field and a style which suited the British army. And quite rightly so, Gates would never command again in the Revolutionary War. A lot to be said about hindsight and generalship, and Gates proved himself unfit for command after this battle. Fortunately, though, for the Revolution and the Continentals, at the next battle, Generals Nathaniel Greene and Morgan could do something in the Carolinas, and maybe teach Tarleton a lesson. But anyway, that's coming up in the next battle, which will be the Battle of Cowpens. If you have any thoughts on the battle, let me know. I look forward to doing these videos. And I hope you're having a good time at the moment. I look forward to talking to you in another video. That's goodbye for now.